Arthur the Coonhound. Leroy wiped sweat from his brow as he unloaded foul-smelling garbage bags from a dark brown trash bin into the back of his pickup truck. Morning heat shimmered above the cul-de-sac. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically across perfect suburban lawns, while distant lawnmowers growled somewhere beyond the neighboring streets. "Ginger is a social person," Leroy muttered to himself. "High society. She'd never really be with the likes of me." He adjusted the stained work gloves hanging from his back pocket and grabbed another black garbage bag. That was when the thick red liquid began leaking from the bottom. At first, Leroy thought it was wine. Then the smell reached him. Copper, warm, rotting. The liquid splashed across the worn khaki trousers before dripping onto the cracked asphalt below. Leroy froze. What the hell? He crouched lower. Blood. The red puddle spread slowly along the pavement. Leroy's stomach tightened. The neighborhood suddenly felt too quiet. He glanced around the cul-de-sac. An elderly woman watered flowers at the far end of the street. A teenage boy bounced a basketball in a driveway. Somewhere nearby, young girls laughed while playing hopscotch. Nobody seemed to notice. Leroy dragged the leaking garbage bag onto the curb. His breathing became shallow. With trembling hands, he ripped the bag open. Inside was the severed head and dismembered body of a middle-aged woman with auburn hair and freckles. Leroy stumbled backward. "Ginger." Arthur immediately sprang from the passenger side of the truck. The old coonhound landed heavily on the pavement before trotting toward the blood pooling beneath the body. Without hesitation, Arthur began licking the asphalt. "Arthur, stop!" The dog ignored him. Arthur greedily lapped at the blood while his tail wagged slowly behind him. "Arthur!" The dog finally paused. Red stained the fur around his mouth. Leroy's pulse hammered violently in his ears. He looked all around the neighborhood again. Still, nobody noticed. Sprinklers clicked, children laughed, a wind chime clattered softly from a nearby porch. Then Leroy saw it. A single envelope protruding from a nearby mailbox beneath the raised red flag. Written across the front in the black marker were two words. "Garbage man." Leroy stared at it. Slowly he approached it. He tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sentence. "I know what you did." Leroy read it again. "I know what you did." Suddenly every sound around him sharpened. The distant lawnmower, the barking dogs, the laughter of children a street over, even the buzzing flies gathering around Ginger's remains. Leroy swallowed hard. "Arthur," he whispered shakily. The dog looked up. Finished drinking. Arthur eagerly returned to the blood puddle. He licked the pavement clean until only a dark stain remained against the black top. It had been 10 years since another living soul knew Leroy's secret. Well, other than Arthur had heard every confession. The dog had listened quietly through whiskey-soaked nights while Leroy sat alone beside campfires or parked trucks talking about the country chili. About rain, about children, about the smell. Arthur never judged. Arthur only listened. Leroy looked farther down the street. An old black pickup truck sat in a driveway beneath a tethered American flag. A faded military bumper sticker peeled from the rusted rear bumper. Something about the truck felt familiar, not the truck itself. Leroy marched toward the house. His boots thudded heavily against the sidewalk, and of course Arthur followed close behind. Leroy climbed the porch steps and pounded against the burgundy front door. Once, twice, 3 times, no answer. Leroy cupped his hands against the nearby window, but yellow curtains blocked his view. Then the deadbolt clicked. The door slowly opened. "Hello, brother." An elderly hunchbacked man stood there gripping a walker fitted with bright new tennis balls. His thin white hair clung to his scalp in patches, and purple veins pulsed beneath paper-thin skin. But his eyes were sharp. They were very sharp. "Come in," the old man said calmly. "We have some talking to do." Arthur growled softly. The old man glanced down at the dog. "He remembers me," the old man said. Leroy felt a chill crawl up his spine. Reluctantly, he stepped inside the house. The old man led him through the house and into a den that looked more like a shrine to war than a living room. Military photographs lined the walls beside medals, folded flags, dusty rifles, and framed newspaper clippings. One photograph stopped Leroy cold. A younger version of the old man stood beside a muddy military transport vehicle somewhere deep in the rainforest terrain. And beside him stood Leroy, 20 pounds thinner, covered in jungle mud, eyes hollow. "I don't think I want to sit," Leroy muttered to the old man. The old man lowered himself carefully into a faded lazy-boy recliner with a painful grunt. A small side table beside him contained pill bottles, reading glasses, and a plastic organizer labeled by weekdays. "What the hell is this all about?" Leroy asked. The old man studied him silently for several seconds. Then the old man spoke. I know what you did." Leroy's jaw tightened. The old man opened the Tuesday compartment of the pill organizer and dumped several tablets into his palm. He swallowed them dry before washing them down with lukewarm chamomile tea. "In Chile," the old man continued quietly, "near the border, 10 years ago." Leroy felt the room begin to tilt. The carpet beneath his boots slowly transformed into dusty jungle roads. The walls dissolved into dense Chilean rainforest. Moist heat pressed against his skin. Rainwater dripped from enormous leaves overhead. Somewhere in the distance came the sound of helicopters and children screaming. The old man calmly stirred his tea. The old man said, "And then there were the children." The old man continued softly. "Stop!" Leroy snapped. His voice echoed strangely through the rainforest. "We are at war. There are enemy combatants." The old man slowly looked up at him. "No," the old man said. "They were children." Leroy's breathing quickened. The jungle around him thickened. Rain fell harder through the trees. He could smell wet earth. Gunpowder. Blood. Then he heard it again. The crying. Not from the jungle. From the cul-de-sac outside. Children playing hopscotch. Leroy suddenly looked down at the bloodstain drying across his worn khaki pants. His shoulders slumped. "I know," Leroy whispered. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The old man flicked the damp tea bag against the inside of his cup with his tongue before swallowing the last mouthful. Then Leroy finally spoke again. "But why Ginger?" His voice cracked. Why the body? She didn't have anything to do with this. She was innocent." A memory suddenly surfaced. Ginger laughing inside the truck while Arthur rested his head on her lap. Ginger teasing Leroy because he still used CDs instead of streaming music. Ginger once telling him that, despite everything rough about him, he had kind eyes. Leroy closed his eyes. He had almost believed her. The old man slowly set his teacup down. "You have your secret?" the old man said quietly. "And I have mine." Silence filled the room. The rainforest slowly faded. The muddy roads dissolved back into shag carpeting. The jungle canopy became the low ceiling of the military den once more. Arthur stared silently at the old man from beside the doorway. Leroy slowly nodded. Then he left. Outside, the neighborhood remained painfully ordinary. Sprinklers, birdsong, American flags waving lazily in the warm breeze. Arthur greeted Leroy at the curb with a wagging tail. Leroy hoisted the partially torn garbage bag containing Ginger's remains into the bed of his truck and concealed it beneath the rest of the morning pickup. For a moment, he simply stood there staring at the bag. Then he climbed behind the wheel. His hand shook slightly as he jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Arthur climbed into the passenger seat beside his steel water bowl. "Arthur?" Leroy muttered quietly. "Water." Arthur stared at him for a moment. Wet crimson stained the fur around the dog's jaws. Then Arthur lowered his head and began to drink the water. Leroy pulled away from the curb, past the American flags, past the children, past the quiet suburban homes. Arthur drank quietly beside him, while somewhere far away, or maybe nowhere at all, rain fell through rainforest trees. The end.